All right. Welcome to Remember Me, the show where we talk about life, legacy, and how you'll be remembered. We're excited today to meet with Neal Dastrup, who's an author, entrepreneur, philanthropist, and most of all, family man. And we have a lot of interesting things to talk about today. So we're just going to kind of jump into a little bit about you and a little bit about your life and whatever you can tell us of, what you've done over the years. I just finished reading your memoirs and
My implausible memoirs.
implausible
Remember, they're
memoirs.
implausible.
That's right. I was reminded because as a missionary, I remember thinking, well, someday I want to write some of these crazy stories that are happening to me, and I was thinking of calling them my Pancho Aventuras, right? And so that's what your book reminded me of, was the implausible memoirs of just, I mean, everything from UFO sightings to, gambling stories and meeting Rodney Dangerfield. And
Yeah. Remember, everything in the book is true-ish.
So what inspired you to, I mean, clearly you've had a lot of things that you've done in your life. What inspired you to write them down in memoirs?
Started out as just a joke on the books or on the memoirs. It started out, I have a friend named Cardell Jacobson. He lives up at Springdale. He is a liberal sociology professor at BYU. And so he always accused me of being too conservative and that I didn't have a great deal of empathy for people. And so I wrote my first story, which was named Ethnic Like Me. And it's about the third chapter in that book, and it was just talking about things that I had done that were quite ethnic.
So
it was all tongue in cheek. I mean, it's not,
right. Well, one of the things I was really interested by the stories was just, obviously every story can be exaggerated a little bit, and there's some tall tale aspect to even what happens in our day-to-day life. But if you were to describe your life just as a whole, what would be the words that you would use to describe your life?
Well, in short, probably fortunate, blessed, and lucky.
So tell us, you were raised here in Utah?
Born in Salina, and when the economy was very, very low, my father decided that we needed to move. He said, we're going to take a vote whether to move to California or Provo, Orem actually. And so we all voted for California, and so he brought us to Orem.
How many siblings do you have?
There's 5 of us, 5 children.
5 of you?
Mm-hmm.
And so growing up, obviously growing up here in Utah and before the memoirs
There's 6
started.
children, excuse me, counting me 6.
Counting yourself.
Yeah.
What's your favorite memory as a child, or your favorite story?
Well, I had a lot of really good stories. One of my favorite that comes to mind first is growing up in a rural area. It's kind of like Mayberry in those days. My grandfather was a town cop. That's what these badges are, and that's the key to the Salina jail up there. And he had a ranch down at a place we called Gooseberry. And Gooseberry was near Fish Lake. It was between Salina and Fish Lake. And we got to spend our summers there, hauling hay and hunting for Indian arrowheads and doing all the things that kids would love to do, riding horses and so forth. It kind of inspired me to want to be at that type of place. That's why I built this ranch. So that's one of the things that comes to mind. Another one is going fishing with my dad. My brother Max and I went fishing a lot with him up in the streams up by Fish Lake, and that was very enjoyable times. So we had a lot of really, like I said, Mayberry type times growing up.
So this ranch is beautiful. I mean, it's winter right now, so everything's covered in snow, but there's a baseball diamond, and there's it looks like maybe an event sort of center or a building down here for meetings, and
we have a big barn down here, and we let BYU groups and other church groups and other types of organizations come up and use it for events, parties, and we've had several receptions, which we don't do it commercially. It's just family for the receptions, but we don't do anything up here commercially. But we let, when the baseball leagues get rained out down in Orem, they come up here and play some of their makeup games, and we have 2 or 3 teams that practice up here all summer long. We have lights so we can do night games, and we have sometimes that we challenge other families to a baseball game, our family against them. Sometimes it's kickball, sometimes it's softball.
Right. I noticed a basketball court.
I have kids that are knee deep in basketball, a lot of them. We have 23 grandchildren, and only 6 of them are girls, so we have a lot of grandsons, and they are big time into sports. We have 5 that live in St. George, and the rest of them live here. And the ones that live here, the oldest, Coleman Ford, is a sophomore, and he starts for the Tentview basketball team. He's a very good basketball player.
Okay.
And my other kids are just really involved all the time in sports, so we try to cater to that.
So how many kids did you have?
We had 7.
And then clearly you said 23 grandchildren. That's great. So that's your biggest legacy.
That is my number one legacy. That's what we live for.
That's awesome. And how often do most of them live nearby still? How often do you see
All
most of them?
Every one of them, except for the one in St. George.
And so I know that one of the things that you've done over the years is built a family business.
Yes.
And
that's the only thing we do that has any profitability. Everything else is just expense.
Right. So it's it's a successful insurance agency, kind of on a regional scale here, and tell us a little bit about how you decided to get into that industry and why build a business.
When I was younger, my father worked for 3 years in insurance with Metropolitan Life, and I knew that as I was growing up that what I wanted to be in was sales. That was my chosen profession. I studied that type of thing, and it came down to whether to go into insurance or real estate, and my dad and a few other people told me we'll go into insurance because they have renewals. Real estate doesn't. So I chose that, and it's been really a perfect fit for me. To build my agency, I started out with Metropolitan Life. So I started out as a life insurance agent, and they didn't have property and casualty when I started. But after I was there 3 years, they brought in property and casualty, just auto and home. And so I built up a pretty good book of business there. And then I decided to leave and become independent and continue to be a life insurance agent with property and casualty. And so I always had a secretary or an office manager that handled the property and casualty. So anyway, with my business, when we decided to go into this business, my wife was very supportive. She knew I'd be working nights, because that's when you can see people when they're home. And I would go door to door for the first 15 years, knocking on doors, making appointments. And so that's kind of how I built my business. I did it from scratch that way. And then I'd go back and talk to them about life insurance, give them my card, tell them to call for auto and home, and they would call my office manager or my secretary for that. And then it just kind of built. And then after about 15 years, I noticed something odd, which was my property and casualty was making a better income than my life insurance sales. So then I started paying attention to that, and it wasn't until then. And then we started buying agencies and developing the property and casualty to become where we are now.
And your branding, obviously, Dastrup Insurance was your name and everything else, and obviously your relationships with your client and that sort of thing.
Even
really
more
been
importantly, with the relationship with the companies, we have such a great group of companies, which some of them people just can't get appointed with, and so that really has helped us a lot. But from the beginning, the branding, when a couple of my boys wanted to come into the business, I told them, okay, we can change the name or do whatever they want. They wanted to keep it my name because I've been doing it for such a long time. And so we went ahead and stayed with that. And Dusty has the office in Orem. Jeremy, my son-in-law, in Pleasant Grove. Sean, my son-in-law, works with me out of the Provo office. And Brandon, who is not a son, but we've told him he's an adopted son now, has a Spanish Fork office. Then we have 3 satellite offices that we provide assistance to help them build their book of business with. And they're all here in the Valley.
How did you decide to make it a family business? You said that your sons were interested in working with you. What gave them that interest?
Well, I never asked any of them to come in to the business. We had, Dusty was very involved in the mortgage business, and then back in 2000 or whatever it was, when the mortgage business went south, Dusty said, well, I guess I knew I'd come into the insurance business someday, so how about, can I start? I said, okay. So we started working with him, and then my daughter Tara got married, and her husband wanted to come into it. Another daughter, Katie, her husband, Sean, he had 2 or 3 other businesses, and they were successful, but he never really found his niche, and then he came into the insurance business with us.
So as your kids were growing, did they have a sense of how successful your brokerage, your agency was growing, or?
I doubt it. They were all involved in whatever they were doing at the time. We also did a little side business all through those years when we lived on 3700 North. It worked well to put a car out on the street and sell it. And I didn't do it myself, but my kids always wanted to have a way to make a little bit of money, so I set up a car dealership. And now 2 of my sons, Devin and Tyler, have that car dealership up in Linden. And they're doing it very well. It's called Dastrup Auto, of all things. And they've done very well with it. And so they're part of the family business, but they're the automobile division.
So a lot of people are scared by being involved with sales and that sort of thing, but you embraced it early on. And in fact, you were telling me.
That's been my love. I really love the selling business. I'll tell you where that really got started. Back when I was in high school, I needed to make a little bit of money. We were fairly poor. I guess not compared to the rest of the world, but compared to some of our peers. And so I always wanted a little extra spending money. My dad got me a catalog that was a Nap shoe catalog. He said, okay, I'll teach you how to sell. I'll take you around, introduce you to people, and show you how to sell shoes to these people. So we did that for a while. It was kind of fun. We'd have people in school would come to my locker and say, okay, I need a new pair of shoes. And I'd get out the catalog and show them what was there and measure their foot. You'd draw their foot on a piece of paper, send it into Nap shoes, and they'd send you back the shoes. So that's kind of where it started. And then at the end of my high school, I went into, it's called summer sales now. Back then, this was unique. There weren't any summer sales out there. And but there was encyclopedias. And so I got to travel all through the West selling encyclopedias. That was my very best training that I ever had for selling. And I think that's where I really fell in love with selling, with the process of selling.
So how did you share that or convey that to your sons, for them to be interested in the same?
Well, the first thing I did was I asked them to read some books about selling, the same books that I read when I was in college. I'd go to the bottom floor of the BYU library. Instead of reading my homework, I would read books like How to Win Friends and Influence People, How I Raised Myself from Failure to Success in Selling, and that type of books. Because those books just really resonated with me. I really enjoyed understanding why people do things the way they do. And the books were, I just absorbed them. So I encouraged my sons and my daughters to read those. One of my daughters, Tara, did come into the insurance business for a while until she got married. Well, a year before she got married, I told her, Terry, you're working nights. You got to get out of the insurance business and just be my assistant because, you're taking your dating time.
Right.
So she did. But she was a very good little sales lady.
So what would you say, or who would you say was your strongest influences?
It's absolute.
Professionally.
My dad.
Your dad?
Yeah, my dad was my rock.
What were some of the things that he did that forged that relationship to be that strong and to be such a strong influence on your life?
Well, first of all, my dad loved his kids and his wife very much, and he was very good with that. But he's like a lot of us that have a little flaw here and there. And when he was in the service in the World War II, he started drinking, and he became an alcoholic. So even though he had this tremendous ability with people and a lot of energy, alcohol kept him from becoming the great success he could have become. So I was bonded to him in two ways. One way was to be like him, and the other way was to not be like him. And he was the greatest influence in my life.
So as you make that decision, obviously a lot of us have maybe people in our lives that we don't want to perpetuate some of their habits and others that we do want to emulate. What were some of the decisions that you had to make to really to do that and to try to follow his example in the right ways and not follow his example in others?
Some of my decisions were very deliberate and some were just lucky. One of the greatest decisions that I made to this day was a couple of the boys that were selling encyclopedias with me were returned missionaries. And I just really liked what I saw in them. The way they handled themselves, their spirituality. And I became the first member of our family to go on a mission. And that was really a big decision that was the best decision that I could have made at that time. It gave me a good foundation for many things in my life. And it was sort of selling. So going door to door, and I came home, and later on when I decided to go into insurance, going door to door was very natural.
So, over your life, over everyone's life, we accumulate stories and experiences and so on. But in reading your memoirs, I would, one of the ways I kind of just think of the book in general is, what does a Mormon kid do during the 60s?
The 60s were just fabulous. And that's one of the blessings that I was lucky with, is to be raised in those days. Who got to be raised in the 60s? Late 50s and all through the 60s and early 70s was a phenomenal time. For music, look at the great music that came out of those years. For politics, Richard Nixon, John Kennedy, the people that were in politics then were very unique. It wasn't the snippy, combative, ridiculous politics that we have going on today. It was genuine philosophies and things that were being promoted back then. It was a wonderful time, and the hippie movement was unbelievable. You'll like reading the Saga of Carlos Delgado, because I put that in that book of the hippie stuff, and up over in Colorado with some of my friends in the hippie movement. And but if hippies came to BYU, the police immediately went over to find out what they were doing, because BYU wasn't part of that type of culture. But we knew it was going on everywhere, because that was what the world was. And it was really interesting. Wonderful time to grow up. Sports were pure and good. The world was good then. The drug thing was starting up with the drug culture, but all in all, it was a wonderful time.
So what made you decide to start writing? Because you've written multiple books now. A lot of them are fiction, and then you have semi-fiction.
Yeah,
non-fiction.
Well, no, all of them are semi-fiction. But they're also semi-true, every one of them. So my memoirs were just a tongue-in-cheek memoir, and in the beginning it says, "Who wants to read somebody's real memoirs?" They're
Right.
just dull and boring, but if you spice it up a little bit, 100 years from now, my ancestors are going to think, "Man, Neal Dastrup was really something," because I must have kind of been the pivotal point for just about every great thing that happened in the United States back in those days. And then The Icy Strait was my second book, and it was a story about people, men coming up to my fishing lodge in Alaska. We have a fishing lodge up there, a commercial lodge, and it's really fun. We built that lodge, and while I was building it, I started writing these stories about the first people that came up there. And so these stories, most of them are really true, but they didn't happen to the one group in 1 week fishing trip. It was spread over a couple of years. The Red Rock Rendezvous is a story about a Ponzi scheme that started in an insurance office in Utah County, Provo to be specific, not my office. And then it ends up on the streets of Las Vegas, and following Howard Hughes' silver hoarding collection to the West Desert, west of Las Vegas in Red Rock, and how the mob gets involved, the FBI gets involved. You have to read the book.
So a lot of people have considered writing a book, but a lot of them never get to it. They have decided not to, or they just don't get around to it. How did you decide to start writing?
Well, the memoirs, the Implausible Memoirs, started out as short stories, and it is a bunch of short stories. They're interrelated, but I would write a short story, and then I would send it out on email to a bunch of my friends, and their job was to make sarcastic comments. And the first comment I got back was from my liberal sociology professor, Cardell, and it said, "You are full of bull." And so every one of the chapters, comments start with "You're full of bull," because it's Cardell. And then I turned the tables on Cardell later in the book, and he thought my sensitivity wasn't what it should be, and so I heard of a polygamist symposium that was going to be being started down in Short Creek, and so I talked Cardell into dressing like a woman as one of my wives and going down to Short Creek to this symposium, so he could find out what polygamist women really feel like. So, it was just absurd.
So, but were you writing these short stories with the intention of writing a book, or just
No,
to share them?
no, intentionally it was just to get a laugh. So I'd write a short story, send it out to my friends, they'd make comments, that would just put fuel on the fire, so I'd write another one. And then it got to be to where I was really enjoying writing these short stories. And so some of them became interrelated with ones prior to that, and before you knew it, I had a book.
That's great. And then once you published the first one, that's when you decided to do more, or?
Yes, well, I didn't really know how to publish things, so I went to a local publisher here and printed a small version of that book. And then later I published The Icy Strait, but then I found out where to get the typesetting done, where to get the cover done, where to get, I found the only places to do that. There's many places to do that, but I found some that worked for me, and I've used the same resources for each one of my books because I've really liked what they've done. But then I went back, and the Implausible Memoirs didn't match up with them. I wanted all my books to match up in size and in format, and so they looked like they belonged to a set. And so I redid the memoirs, and I added a bunch of more stories to it just to make it bigger.
So was writing your memoirs, was the intention to leave something behind of your life stories for posterity, or was it just to try to get some interest in the actual stories, or what was the main premise behind it?
Let's alter a little bit of history and say that I really had a plan, which I didn't. But originally it was just to get a laugh out of my friends.
Sure. And
really just to jerk the Cardell's chain a little bit. I still do to this day. Just really enjoy putting me on his heels every once in a while with one stupid comment or another. And I love him. He's a wonderful man. And but we just have a conflicting lifestyle, or conflicting philosophy, rather. But I didn't really have a plan of that. But then as it went along, I think that really did become something important to me, to leave something that my children, grandchildren, and on down the line it'll be here forever. It's like an artist that does a great painting, leaves the painting. Well, his ancestors can look at it and say, wow, that was my great-great-grandpa that painted that. And with this, it's not great literature, but it's good literature, and it's fun to read, and so I think they'll read it. And if they give a book report on it someday, that would really be a feather in my cap. I would love that.
So you've done that in a lot of ways, because now,
Yeah.
like we talked about, you have a family business, and I think the intention would be then for that business to continue after you're gone. And
Yes,
continue
actually,
in the family.
it's a two-edged sword. One side of it is I have developed things that my family just absolutely loves. I mean, they use our Alaska fishing lodge a lot. Every one of my kids and grandkids come up every year, almost every year. Sometimes they have a conflict. Some of them can't make it, but it's a real family tradition. They all use the place in Las Vegas, and every Sunday, all of them that are here come to Sunday dinner if they don't have another commitment. And so they're always here at the ranch every Sunday, and through the summer it's like all the time. So it's, in insurance we call it an attractive nuisance. We've created a nuisance here that they are attracted to, and so they want to come up here to fish in the pond, or they want to come up and play baseball. They want to come up and ride the motorcycles around the property. They love being here. And so our grandkids have got the blessing of being raised as if they were all in the same family. And for me, that is a great heritage, because they are bonded together so well that it brings tears to my eyes to see how close they are. And they play on the same ball teams. We go to so many ball games every week with basketball and with baseball in the summer. But with basketball, we'll have 2 or 3 kids on one team because there are a lot of them the same age. And then my sons and sons-in-law coach those teams, so they followed my footsteps there. I mentioned I had 40 years of coaching. That was one of the greatest blessings that I had, being in the insurance business. I could schedule time to do things like that. So every one of my children, I was able to coach them, initially football, baseball, and basketball, and then it kind of transitioned into where it was just basketball. But I got to coach their teams all the way through, and I see kids to this day that call me coach. And that's really kind of a big blessing. I ran into Bronson Kafusi at church a couple of weeks ago, and he comes running up, "Coach, what are you doing here, Coach?" And it's the same. We have a lot of them that have really succeeded in many parts of their life. That is fulfilling to me to know that I had a part of their upbringing. I spend hours with them every week to coach them.
So did you know when you built this estate up here, and when you built the lodge and so on, did you know that would have that effect on the family, bringing them together, and was that the intention?
My wife and I felt that it would, and I have to really give her most of the credit, because most women would just tell me to not, if I were married to somebody else, they would say, "This is just a waste of time. Don't do that. It's too risky," and so forth, all the excuses, and not be supportive. You're not home enough, or whatever it might be. But my wife, from day one, has been my biggest supporter and best cheerleader, and always made sure that I felt like I was going in the right direction. She gave me her opinions, and her opinions were usually better than mine, so it really refined what I was trying to do and how to think through it. A few of the things, she wasn't so sure. She wanted to leave the neighborhood and move up into the mountain. You couldn't get her away from here now. So there were a few things that were a little bit of a struggle, but it wasn't that big of a struggle. She became supportive in every single thing. The fishing lodge, she actually goes up there and stays with me the full 2 months we're there. We're trying to trim that back a little bit to maybe 6 weeks now, but she goes up and works up there. I mean, she works like crazy, but she works here. I mean, when it snows, she gets in the plow truck and plows the roads. So I think with a great legacy comes a great wife.
That's great.
And, any wives that might be listening to your show need to realize that if they would not work so hard about keeping their husband from doing his work, if they would get behind him and support him and become part of it, family life would work better. And I'm not saying that chauvinistically. I'm saying be a team. Be part of the success of the family. And even sometimes it's hard. Well, sometimes it's hard for the husband too. And so just be a part of that. And that would be
But the results will benefit everybody.
The results are worth it. And the results that my wife has contributed, all the kids figure everything that we have done has been because my wife. And that's okay with me, as I think it is.
So as we kind of wrap things up, what would you say are the most meaningful things or the most, impactful things that you've done in your life?
Family is number one for me. The foundation of the church is right there with it. We're supposed to say church first, but I say my family's first. The foundation the church has given me to follow the right path and to make good decisions. Not that I've always made the right decision, but morally and ethically to try to do my best, and when I mess up to try to adjust and correct those mistakes. So I think my family, the church, my friends, those are the things, and really from the bottom of my heart, the country that we live in. It's a sad thing to see the deterioration that I think is being caused to our country now, and it's being caused purposely. People want to destroy the great legacy that is America. So our great fathers are our forefathers that developed this country.
What would you say, is there anything that if you were to go back in time that you would change about your life?
No, I don't. Didn't get married until I was a little older, 28. That's not old in the eyes of the world anymore. My wife was younger than me, 9 years. And I had to mature a little bit, I think, is what happened there. But I enjoyed those years of being single. I was able to really find out what I wanted in life. And so with my marriage, I wouldn't change a thing. With my business, I wouldn't change a thing. With my heritage, my children, I wouldn't change anything. My parents and my ancestors going in the other direction have given me a wonderful opportunity to be where I live and to be able to succeed. So I wouldn't change anything.
And what would you say is how you would want to be remembered by history, by your family, and by those who know you?
I think to be remembered is probably the first thing. To actually be remembered would be nice, because as we pass on, there's not a lot of us that are remembered. It's just that person's gone. I lost my brother 2 months ago. He's a year and a half younger than me, and I think about him constantly, about what a wonderful person he is. So I guess if I could be remembered like he's been remembered, as a good person, somebody that cared about people, and somebody that had, I want to be remembered as a person that was willing to take chances, to making good decisions, but being willing to put it on the line to move forward, and to develop the kind of a culture within my own family that my children would want to be the same way.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for letting us sit with you for a little bit and sharing your stories with us. And I think there's a lot that we can all learn from your stories and your example.
Thank you.